What's up, brother? Hey, man, I'm just working from home. Happy Wednesday. Hope you're doing well. I was just thinking, I've been listening to Super Soul Sunday Conversations or whatever it's called by Oprah on Spotify. My dad sent it to me. She's in this particular one interviewing Brene Brown, who's written a bunch of books. She kind of, skyrocketed to stardom, if you will, after she had a very powerful TEDx talk, which again, I highly recommend, on vulnerability. But Daring Greatly is a phenomenal book. But in this interview with Oprah, Brene refers to this quote that Theodore Roosevelt spoke, obviously many years ago, which if you haven't read it or heard it, I'm going to read it to you real quick again. If you have heard it, it's always so good to listen to, and then I want to talk about it real quick. It reads, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, and who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the very best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." Fuck, I love that. It's so good because, man, I can tell you so many years of my life, probably the first 30, in many respects, I'm putting a very broad stroke over it, but I think one of the biggest ahas I had, even in my mid-30s, was the realization that I had not fully ever committed 100% of myself to anything. Not to my marriage, not to sports, not to academics, not to anything. I was always kind of dipping my toe in. That way, if I failed, I then would have that excuse of at least I didn't fully go all in. Had I gone all in, I probably would have been all right and I would have achieved my, but I didn't, so that's why I didn't, achieve success, if you will. But man, I just in the last several years, it's there's another quote that says, "I would rather commit 100% to the wrong thing than only commit 50% to the right thing." And I think about that in relationships, because that's a really scary area for me. Even this year, a lot of you guys know me intimately of what I've been going through in terms of putting on even meeting of men events where I'm putting out money, or even a lot of these men's retreats where I'm putting out thousands of dollars, not even knowing yet if any of you guys would want to join me on it. Those type of things are scary, whether it be putting out your heart, putting out, just being vulnerable, which is, to Brene's point, the scariest part of it all. And I think she goes on to say at some point in that conversation with Oprah that we live in a scarcity culture, even though we live with so much ridiculous abundance. The fact that I'm shooting this on a small computer in my hand, aka my iPhone, and then uploading it to the internet, craziness, right? I just flew to Milwaukee, took me 2.5 hours, which that would have taken months back in a covered wagon, right? So much abundance, and yet we don't even, we take it all for granted. But with this scarcity mindset and culture that we live in, where we're not enough, we don't amount to whatever it is that we want to amount to. We don't stack up against the people that we see on the internet, right? When we're in the scarcity mindset, we oftentimes will default into shutting down. We'll shut down, and the last place we go is vulnerability. And that vulnerability actually is what creates intimacy and connection. So I can't tell you how many of you guys, those of you that are probably watching this, if we've sat down for coffee, chances are good that you or myself have shared some intimate, vulnerable information that I always keep to myself. but it is what creates the connection between us. Like so many of you guys are my really good friends now because of that fact that I was willing to be vulnerable and you were willing to be vulnerable in return, right? Vice versa. So vulnerability, man, is true power in life, and you cannot have the intimacy and the depth of connection without vulnerability. You cannot have vulnerability when you're in a scarcity mindset, and you cannot become a leader if you're not willing to step into your fears. So many of these guys that show up for the Meeting of Men events, their very first time, you know how much resistance they've stepped into? And even if you've come to several events, you may still feel that sense of anxiety of kind of like, oh God, I don't want to make small talk, and this is awkward. There's probably a lot of guys who don't come to events because of that unwillingness to step into the uncomfortable. But I'll tell you right now, you will not be proud of who you could potentially be if you're not willing to continually step into that space of vulnerability. You will not be willing to lead, to start business, to step into the relationship, to have kids, to take that financial risk, whatever the case might be, rehab your whole, physical body if you need to, without that willingness to step out of your comfort zone into vulnerability. So at the end of the day, though, at least, like this says, at least you can be that person who has dared greatly, who has stepped into the arena, who will never find themselves with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Because a lot of guys can sit back and poo-poo us on my Facebook ads about, the Meeting of Men, and say a whole bunch of stupid shit behind, a computer and anonymously, but then never actually step into the arena, never know what victory or defeat feels like. So I give you major props for being a part of this community, my man. So thankful to you. Hopefully looking forward to seeing you on Monday night, the next Meeting of Men, where we're going to set some serious goals and do some serious digging and work through our fears and things like that to set ourselves up for an amazing 2020. So if you haven't already grabbed yourself a ticket, please do so. Looking forward to seeing you there, and have a good night. Later.